We are all frustrated because this thing had gone on far too long. We're under the impression that they would come, they might stay a day or two and then move on. Did not take it seriously. There was no evidence that they were going to stay that long from my perspective.
When we talk about takeaways or lessons learned, one of the things I've reflected upon about this particular incident is the extreme naivete demonstrated by so many organizations, from police organizations to government officials to you four gentlemen, specifically Mayor Watson. You all felt that this was going to go away within 48 hours. This was organized for weeks prior to these truckers and their supporters arriving in the city of Ottawa. They were coming from the West Coast, they were coming from the East Coast, and everywhere in between. So how could anyone be so naive to think, given that their mandate, which was widely shared across all kinds of social media platforms, that they weren't leaving until all federal mandates were removed, how anyone could think that 48 hours from now, someone who's traveled from Vancouver, British Columbia, would just say, okay, my point's been made, and then return. They were there to speak to a government official. That didn't happen. So I wanted to throw that out for consideration. Now, we've heard on a couple of occasions from my colleague, Mr. Virani, who took two opportunities to describe the actions of a certain member of Parliament. And I listened very carefully to your responses, Mayor Watson, and clearly your indignation with respect to that member of Parliament was very evident. Comments such as, that particular member giving it credibility, it's an insult to the wound. I bet I didn't hear that same indignation when the Prime Minister of this country was the origin, was the genesis for the anger that many people had about mandates. The same Prime Minister who called these people extremists, racists, misogynists, those with unacceptable views, those who don't believe in science, those who take up space. Were you concerned about the Prime Minister using that language, Mayor Watson?
No, what I was concerned with was seeing swastika flags and seeing Confederate
That's not
flags.
the question. Were you concerned about the Prime Minister's language?
No, I wasn't.
Well, obviously not, because you used that same language yourself. You called those protesters yahoos.
Yes.
Those were disgraceful. They were despicable, engaging in unacceptable behavior. The vast majority of these people were not being respectful.
And
They weren't just outsiders, Mayor Watson. These were people who live in your city.
Point of order.
People who were there to support those truckers also include residents of your city. Were they yahoos as well? Were they those who were holding unacceptable views? Were they engaging in unacceptable behavior? I think the answer is obvious. No, they were not. But you had no problem answering the question because it was important for you to set the agenda. It was important for you to maintain your liberal ideology. We all know about your background, Mayor Watson. We know you're a former federal staffer. We know about your member of parliament status in the province and you were a minister. We know all about that. I bet you didn't critique the Prime Minister when he took a knee when protesters were on the Hill during mid-COVID. You probably said nothing about that. Of course not. You were also criticized.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
You were criticized after your testimony at the commission by a member of the press. The headline read, "Watson wanted to protect Trudeau, embarrass Ford during convoy." We've got testimony from your city manager, Mr. Kanalokas, who basically put on record that you were quite hesitant about even engaging in the whole thought about a mediator, because what would that do to Mr. Trudeau's reputation? What would that do to the reputation of the federal government? Your exact words. He was very reluctant. His initial reaction was, we couldn't do that and thought that doing that was going to put pressure on the federal government in terms of, if we meet with them, someone else would have to meet with them, said Mr. Kanellakis.
Votre temps est écoulé.
Your time is up, Mr. Brock.